Since Brawl Stars' release, Mortis has stood as one of the most infamous brawlers of all time. From being the first true assassin in the game to being absolutely clowned on for his long history of bad randoms, Mortis has stood the test of time as one of the most popular yet divisive brawlers in Brawl Stars. Why was Mortis hated for so long, and how did this reputation form within the community? Today, we're exploring the history of Mortis' rises and falls in the meta and controversial legacy in the game, and whether Mortis truly was as infamous as we remember, or if it was all undeserved. The start of Mortis' history runs all the way back to Brawl Stars beta in June of 2017. Mortis is so old he even predates the entire mythic rarity, and was originally an epic since mythics weren't even invented yet. Not only did Mortis have this janky model, but he also had this extra long dash that gave him unreal mobility. It was honestly one of the most outrageous main attacks the game has ever seen. This was before the days of auto aim, by the way, so Mortis could really hit and run or snatch a few gems real quick before you could even think about hitting him. Mortis was way too strong on release, hence his first balance changes being immediate nerfs to his dash range, health, movement speed, and super range to humble him. This was around the time Mortis' first star power, Creepy Harvest, was released. This star power worked way differently at the time, instead dropping a skull on the ground each time you defeated an enemy, which you had to pick up to get your heal, similar to Gus's mechanic in modern day. It's worth mentioning that as soon as Brawl Ball was introduced, Mortis broke the game mode. Shooting the ball used to not take any ammo, so Mortis could self-pass 3 times in a row, dribbling his way up half the field and hiking past the enemy team. This made Brawl Ball Mortis' best game mode at the time, but this piece of history would later come to haunt him. Mortis was retuned following these nerfs to balance him, buffing everything but his dash range because that absurd mechanic needed to chill out. One of the more interesting changes Mortis received in beta was a double health buff, setting the idea that Mortis wasn't just a typical high burst, low HP assassin most games featured. Mortis was a semi-tanky brawler who didn't have the most burst but had just enough to counter squishy brawlers using his mobility. He could easily handle his best matchups against sharpshooters and throwers, but was pretty helpless against his worst against tanks and melee brawlers. This would only further contribute to Mortis' high skill floor and skill ceiling, which I'll get to later. Mortis' last balance change in beta was getting his very fast movement speed back, before Mortis was left alone for the 6 months leading up to global launch. Supercell was content with shipping out this version of Mortis for the world to see. Well, his mechanics at least. Not his model, which they thankfully remade in September of 2019. Wait, where does hat go? Yeah. Brawl Stars removed Mortis' hat in his remodel, which the community hated so much, they forced Supercell to give it back as a free skin that's still available for everyone today. Hooray, community and Brawl Stars team! Truly solving the greatest problems of our time. Now the game's finally ready for global launch. So stupid. And with that, Brawl Stars launched globally on December 12th, 2018, to which Mortis debuted with a lukewarm stance in the meta. While he was heavily desired for his mythic rarity and his unique assassin playstyle, Mortis wasn't actually super meta defining. Well, one way Mortis did define the meta was almost single-handedly forcing Brawl Ball to require an ammo to shoot the ball starting late January of 2019. It was in this exact update Mortis also received some voice lines that would add a lot of personality to his character. I had imagined him with a deep, really sinister and intimidating voice, but he turned out more like a dastardly cartoon villain.
Mortis, bringer of doom! I am a creature of the night!
Life for Mortis wasn't the most eventful for the next few months. He fell into being a sort of niche counterpick brawler, someone not the best in every game mode simply because he wasn't brilliant at his job, even if he was one of the only brawlers who could fulfill it. Soon, however, Mortis received a star power that would change his life forever. Coiled Snake. This star power gave Mortis a dash bar which would charge in 3 seconds under full ammo. When the dash bar was full, Mortis's next attack would have double range. This gave Mortis just a taste of his glory days of Brawl Stars beta, returning him to a better spot in the meta since he can now reasonably close the distance between himself and enemies. Mortis was the first brawler to have the unique trait of using his own ammo as a form of mobility, and by using Coiled Snake as a distance closer, Mortis could actually use his ammo to efficiently assassinate sharpshooters and throwers in game modes like Bounty and Gem Grab. But unfortunately, in the next 2 months, Coiled Snake would be watered down to rain on Mortis's parade, receiving a nerf to its range boost and extending its charge time. Meanwhile, Mortis's Creepy Harvest star power was buffed in an attempt to even the usefulness of his star powers. But Mortis was still left in a weak spot in the meta following this nerf. While Mortis did experience a small revival with Coiled Snake, it seems Supercell wasn't content with Mortis being very powerful at all in the early stages of Brawl Stars' full release. Evident with how following the buff of Creepy Harvest, Mortis doesn't receive another change for 5 months. Why was this the case? Well, similar to other brawlers throughout history who've been kept weak for long periods of time, Mortis's use rate has always been high. Showdown, Gem Grab, Bounty, don't even get me started on Brawl Ball. Mortis was seen in nearly every mode, no matter how bad he was. His gameplay was truly unique, he was fun to play with, and he was widely accepted as one of the most high-skill brawlers in the game. This concocted a disaster of a situation for most of Mortis's history, as despite being the kind of brawler only the best should be playing with, almost everyone wanted to use him. There was this sort of prestige about being good with Mortis. You would always see pro players doing sick trick shots with him in Brawl Ball, and now all of a sudden, everyone's using Mortis thinking they're tough, but they're just not. Even throughout Brawl Stars' first year globally, Mortis was memed on constantly for being the vessel for bad randoms. A lot of the player base dreaded having Mortis teammates, and this legacy loomed over Mortis for years to come. With the release of gadgets in March of 2020, Mortis's gadget Combo Spinner would make its first appearance in the game. This gadget was unremarkable, honestly. It basically helps Mortis deal an extra attack's worth of damage, which is nice, but not extraordinary relative to all the other gadgets. It actually used to feel super awkward to use because Mortis was stationary while he used it. Soon after, it was reworked to function the way it does today. Mortis remained a low tier option. Supercell feared buffing Mortis too heavily as it would make him downright oppressive to the brawlers he already countered. On the other hand, Mortis was left in a state where he also got hard countered really easily. This is why Mortis took so much skill to work in most matchups. In a 3v3 scenario, Mortis is likely to run into good matchups, bad matchups, and coin flips, which he'll have to navigate and position for accordingly so he can still be of use to his team. If your Mortis doesn't know how to do that, chances are you're strapped in for a 2v3, which can be really frustrating, especially since he was one of the most used brawlers in the game. Throughout 2020, Mortis was left as a bottom tier brawler. Balancing Mortis was a dangerous task since, as we saw in beta and with Coiled Snake, even just a little extra mobility can make Mortis way too strong and annoying to play against. While Mortis did receive his second gadget, Survival Shovel, it's not life-changing enough for Mortis to give him an edge over other brawlers who were also getting their second gadgets. Just as 2020 came to a close, Mortis was neglected for another 8 months. After a long time waiting, however, Mortis was finally ready for his first real revival. In August of 2021, Mortis's Coiled Snake star power would become a part of his base kit, only it charged Mortis's extra long dash in 4.5 seconds rather than 3.5. Meanwhile, Coiled Snake was reworked to simply decrease the charge time of his long dash by 1.5 seconds. This took Mortis's star power decision from a close toss-up to a non-negotiable choice. Creepy Harvest hands down became the better option. Remember when Coiled Snake was the dominant star power, so Supercell buffed Creepy Harvest so it could compete? Well, Supercell basically built in a budget Coiled Snake into Mortis's kit, giving you complete freedom to use this buffed Creepy Harvest in addition to having that long dash mechanic. It was the best of both worlds, and Mortis finally soared up to high tier. But in an all too familiar fashion, Mortis's era of dominance would eventually come to a close. Inevitably, Creepy Harvest was knocked down a peg, nerfed to heal only 1000 HP by the start of 2022. Mortis soon fell down to a familiar mid-tier, settling for being that niche counterpick brawler who owned some matchups and was hopeless in others once again. Supercell seems to like this role for Mortis, or at least feels this is the only place Mortis can exist without being straight up unhealthy. Imagine a version of Mortis who is already an S-tier brawler all around getting a favorable matchup in Bounty. It would just be impossible for the other team with how lopsided the interaction is, which is just not fun. With how hit or miss Mortis's mechanics are, it becomes a tricky balancing dilemma, tapping into both extremes more easily than other brawlers, which is dangerous considering how high his use rate is at all times. Take that 3v3 example I showed earlier. That coin flip matchup turning green or red is all it takes for Mortis to become broken or useless. And maybe this is why Mortis was ignored for a whopping 1.5 years. Not because he was the most balanced brawler the whole way through, but because he was such a can of worms to balance. Eventually, Mortis became a severe victim of power creep, neglected for 18 months as new brawlers were introduced and old brawlers were buffed. Sliding down to bottom tier, Mortis became even easier to meme on since he was overused and terribly underpowered, making it even more frustrating when your teammates chose him in 3v3. And by the halfway point of 2023, Supercell must have decided Mortis's downfall was too great to ignore. In June, Mortis received some small damage buffs to his main attack and combo spinner gadget, but the real remedy was a change to Mortis's long dash mechanic in September. Now, Mortis's long dash bar wouldn't only charge when he had full ammo, just when he stopped attacking. Throughout his history, Mortis has relied on this long dash mechanic to reasonably reach and assassinate enemies. If he needed to use 2 dashes to even reach a brawler, assassinating them would usually be a lost cause. Just by receiving greater access to this long dash, he could finally assassinate his best matchups once again. While it was no top tier like Mortis has once seen, Mortis mains were finally happy to see their boy back into mid tier, escaping the dreaded trenches of low tier at last. But even though this was a small break for Mortis enjoyers, the creature of the night still wasn't in the best spot. Mortis's unremarkable stance in the meta was evident in World Finals that year, as for being a supposed counter-pick specialist, he was only picked a total of 2 times all tournament. Mortis received another small damage buff in April of 2024, but this didn't have much impact on his viability. As hypercharges were being added left and right, Mortis remained largely stagnant following the change to his long dash bar, and saw himself slowly falling to low tier, succumbing to power creep even faster than he did last time. By this point, Mortis had experienced a rough past 2 years. But if you've played video games long enough, especially Brawl Stars, you know it's true when I say every dog has its day. Yeah, it's Hypercharge. Mortis's Hypercharge Blood Boomerang single-handedly carried Mortis all the way to top tier, being arguably the strongest Hypercharge in the game when it was released and giving Mortis massive team-wipe potential. Blood Boomerang, released in August of 2024, made Mortis's super return to him, as the name suggests, like a boomerang, dealing double the damage, double the healing, and recharging twice as much of his super, on top of a speed, shield, and damage boost. With just one Hypercharge, Mortis could chain multiple Hypercharge supers, which dealt an unreal amount of damage, healed Mortis an absurd amount, and allowed him to wipe entire teams. And with the use of his mythic gear, Bat Storm, Mortis could receive this double damage and healing ultra consistently. In true hit or miss fashion, Mortis still wasn't able to beat his worst matchups with his Hypercharge, but it allowed him to wreak havoc on coin flip matchups he usually wasn't able to pull off without dying in a team fight or by a third party. But as with most broken Hypercharges on release, Blood Boomerang came back to Earth soon after, receiving a nerf to its Hypercharge multiplier just 5 weeks after its release. And disappointingly enough, this nerf came just in time for World Finals of 2024, where Mortis was only banned once and not picked a single time. Half a year later, in late March of 2025, Blood Boomerang received yet another nerf to its Hypercharge multiplier, now completely subduing its once overpowered state. Mortis's brief moment of glory was officially over. Which brings us to present day in summer of 2025, where Mortis has been safely secured in mid-tier for the past half year. And as the game's developed and new brawlers keep getting released, it seems that Mortis's once infamous reputation is finally starting to clear. Not all the way, since he definitely still has a bad reputation in 3v3 and Brawl Ball, but as new assassins and wilder brawlers with even more insane mechanics come to light, Mortis no longer feels like the overwhelming figurehead for bad randoms or toxic assassins. Blackbird Edgars often throw your games even harder, Kit can be even more toxic to play against, and Ali's mechanics literally take Mortis's uniqueness and puts it on steroids. So I guess even if Mortis is still really popular and does still receive occasional hate, he doesn't bear that burden alone anymore. And after all that time clowning on Mortis for always being the worst randoms or missing Brawl Ball trick shots or diving in with 10 gems, I guess it's nice to see a little change of scenery. Sometimes. Alright, yo Edgar, chill. That's a lot of gems you got there, man. Yo chill out. Yo, what are you doing?